Memory and its processes are very complex, and memory is best viewed as a puzzle rather than a folder in a filing cabinet full of memories. There are many different parts to a memory. For example, when you are riding a bike, in the same moment you are remembering your destination, how to ride the bike, the nervous feeling when a car is near, the rules of the road, and the sound of a car horn. All of these different aspects of one memory of riding your bike comes from all different parts of the brain. To start off how all of these aspects come together to form a solid memory, your memory has three processes: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Now, the first step in creating a memory is encoding. Encoding is rooted in the senses and begins with perception, so paying attention is crucial to properly encode something. Encoding allows the information that came from sensory input or the stimuli, such as what you heard or what you felt in a situation, to be converted into a construct that the memory system can cope with, so it can be stored and retrieved later on. Think of this as similar to changing your money into a different currency when you travel from one country to another. And all of this information travels to the hippocampus to be assigned to one memory. And as to where the information is encoded, wherever the information is created in the brain, that is where it is converted. For example, what you feel in reaction to a situation is created and encoded in the amygdala, which is the part of the brain located in the cerebral cortex that is responsible for your emotions. As I said before, paying attention is crucial to encode properly, so the frontal lobe, and specifically the thalamus and the temporal lobe, are vital to encoding because they are what makes you pay attention. The process of encoding begins with a memory trace being created in response to the external stimuli. The sensations then travel to the hippocampus, which integrates these perceptions as they are occurring into one single experience. A neural network of cortical synapses effectively records the various associations which are linked to the individual memory. The result in it is a network of neurons that fire synchronously in a specific pattern connecting to the different parts of the brain linked to the memory. There are 4 different types of encoding: visual encoding, the encoding of images; acoustic encoding, the encoding of sounds; semantic encoding, the encoding of meaning; and tactile encoding, the encoding of feeling. Visual encoding occurs in the occipital lobe, towards the back of the brain, which is responsible for sight, and tactile encoding occurs in the somatosensory cortex, while acoustic and semantic encoding occur in the different parts of the temporal lobe, which is responsible for a variety of things, such as smell, sound, and meaning.
Once a memory is encoded, it is stored. Each component of memory is stored where they are created, like encoding. For example, a group of neurons in the amygdala store the associated emotion. There are 3 stages of storage for memories. There is a sensory stage, short-term memory, and long-term memory. First is the sensory stage. It usually lasts only a fraction of a second. It's your sensory memory that allows a perception, such as a visual pattern, a sound, or a touch, to linger for a brief moment after the stimulation is over. After that first flicker, the sensation is stored in short-term memory. Next comes your short-term memory, or also known as the working memory. It is a limited capacity and it can hold about 7 items for up to 30 seconds at a time. The information that is deemed worthy through a process unknown to scientists goes on to be stored into a long-term memory. Important information is gradually transferred from short-term memory into long-term memory. The more the information is repeated or used, the more likely it is to eventually end up in long-term memory, or to be retained. Unlike sensory and short-term memory, which are limited and decay rapidly, long-term memory can store unlimited amounts of information in depth.
The last process of memory is retrieval. Retrieval is when the brain replays a pattern of neural activity that was originally generated in response to a particular event, echoing the brain's perception of the real event. It is not exact because if it were, it would be as if experiencing the event again. Retrieval is a very complicated process in which scientists have not been able to fully understand. Like we said before, the way we remember something can be thought of as a jigsaw puzzle. This is because the different elements or senses of a memory are reconstructed from various areas of our brains in order to form a complete memory. Memory retrieval therefore requires revisiting the nerve pathways the brain formed when encoding the memory. How quickly memory can be reconstructed is dependent on the strength of these pathways. Retrieval effectively returns a memory from long-term storage to short-term or working memory, where it can be accessed in a kind of mirror image of the encoding process. It is then restored back into long-term memory, thus reconsolidating and strengthening it. Most of what we remember is by direct retrieval, where items of information are linked directly to a question or cue. However, if you do have trouble remembering something, it's usually not the fault of your entire memory system, but an inefficient component of one part of your memory system.
Memory is heavily dependent on the nervous system and uses it to send information all across the brain to the different parts of the brain needed for memory. Memory is encoded and stored using the language of electricity and chemicals. Electrical pulses carry messages through neurons and across synapses as the chemical messengers known as neurotransmitters relay, amplify, and modulate signals between neurons and other cells. There are many different areas of the brain that contribute to memory, but some of the most important are the basal ganglia, which is crucial to retrieval, and the cerebral cortex, which makes up most of your brain and contains many of the key parts to memory. The cerebral cortex is separated into 4 lobes: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. The parietal lobe integrates sensory information from the various senses, and the occipital lobe is responsible for eyesight. The frontal lobe is important because it contains the prefrontal cortex, which is an important part in processing short-term memory and retaining long-term memory. The temporal lobe is responsible for senses, smell, and sound. And the medial temporal lobe, the inner part of the temporal lobe, is very important because it holds the hippocampus and, like mentioned earlier, it pieces all the different parts of an experience together to form a memory. It also has the amygdala, which is responsible for emotions, and it has the thalamus, which is responsible for pain.